many of us have known him for many years, but Kip was elected in 2022, November. But a little bit on his background, he was born and raised in rural Northeast Missouri. I believe it was Marys County. Was that Marys County?
Monroe and Marion County. So
Monroe and Marys, because I met your father when you were running, and that was a nice event. Like many Columbians, he came to Boone County for his education, and he got an undergraduate and a graduate degree here. Like actually, his undergraduate was at Columbia College, and then graduate at University of Missouri. He worked with a number of local organizations, Job Point, Columbia College, University of Missouri School of Journalism, and then worked for 8 years in the General Assembly as a state representative, and then 2 years as chief of staff in the Missouri Senate. And I think we all know that he was the minority ranking member of the Budget Committee, which I'm sure his knowledge of that will help us in Boone County. He's been on a lot of boards and commission, and I met Kip, I don't know, more than 10 years ago when he served on the Boone County Environment and Energy Commission. And that was a while ago, wasn't it, Kip?
it was probably around 2005, I suspect.
Right. I was on that commission for a long time. So anyway, today he is going to be talking to us about the property tax, a conversation about the proposed senior property tax freeze, as it's being called. And I think we're all really looking forward to that. Thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I see that looking at the participants, I know KMOU is on as well, and so appreciate them being on the call. And I will kind of do my best to explain kind of the process getting here and then potentially moving forward as well. But I want to make sure I save plenty of time for questions as well. I will say that this has been a challenging issue to try to wrap our minds around and do so in a way that is in the best interest of everyone. So Senate Bill 190, the underlying bill of Senate Bill 190 was a tax exemption. It was basically removing Social Security from being counted as taxable income in the state of Missouri. Missouri joined 32 other states in making that happen. So that's the underlying bill. An amendment that was added on the Thursday before the end of session on the Senate floor added what has become ultimately the biggest conversation around Senate Bill 190, and that is the senior property tax freeze. And so this was an amendment that hadn't been vetted in committee, hadn't gone through committee. It was an amendment that was proposed at around 10-ish, 10:15 or so in the morning on the Thursday before session ended. And ultimately, like I said, I think I remember sitting at my desk getting some work done, having the Senate feed on in the background, and hearing that amendment pop up. And it's like, whoa, I bet that's going to lead to a big discussion at the county level. And it has, and it will continue to do so. So that portion of it, the senior property tax freeze, when it came about, it put the power in the county's hands. And so rather than making the ultimate decision at the state level, and rather than addressing an expansion of circuit breaker tax credit, which is a program that Department of Revenue has administered for 30 plus years, they put this back on the county commission level, as well as a route through initiative petition on. The question was, should seniors be exempted from new taxes on their real property, on their primary residence? Missouri Association of Counties quickly began reviewing the legislation. That included Boone County, and we collectively, as an organization, as a state organization, noticed quite a few drafting errors, potential unintended consequences as a result of the legislation really not being vetted through the process, through a committee, and taking public testimony. And so the vast majority of counties across the state of Missouri have not taken any action at this time. Only 11 counties. That could have changed, but last time, when last Missouri Association of Counties meeting, only 11 counties had taken action on this. And those who had adopted the policy, not all of them had implemented. And I believe the majority of the 11 have not technically implemented at this point. I could be wrong there. And so I know that there are a lot of counties very much taking a wait and see. We made a legislative priority to see the Missouri General Assembly pass some cleanup legislation that had been recommended by the Missouri Association of Counties in cooperation with Senate leadership, House leadership, to try to get some of these questions answered. Senate Bill 756 is moving on the Senate side. House Bill 2532 is moving on the House side. And so feel confident that some type of legislation may pass this year, whether or not it addresses all the issues or potentially adds additional complexities to it, we're not for sure. The Boone County Commission saw the interest in gaining momentum here in Boone County. We were receiving a lot of calls concerned that we hadn't taken any action on it yet. And it's kind of hard to explain to constituents across Boone County how complex this issue is, how drafting errors in legislation impacts how the law can and will be interpreted. I'm happy to get into those if people have questions about some of the drafting errors or potential unintended consequences of it. But a lot of seniors want to see this move, and so we know that there is a lot of steam gaining on an initiative petition that is being circulated, and so Boone County Commission felt it was important, rather than us. Commission has the ability to make a decision like this, but we also know that this is a major tax policy decision that impacts all taxpayers in Boone County. It impacts the taxing jurisdictions that receive real property tax. And so we wanted to place this question on the April ballot, where typically the vast majority of those conversations about local taxing policy happen, where you see tax levies determined, where you see bond indebtedness approved or disapproved by the voters across Boone County. We felt like this is an important conversation to have publicly, so that we could get a better understanding of what voters want to see, how they would like to see policy implemented, whether or not the policy should be implemented, and then how do we proceed. The county commission has consistently taken the approach. We know that there are people, not just seniors, people in general across the board who have a hard time making ends meet. We know that this is geared towards seniors. So how can we, as a county commission, balance the needs of the seniors who need it the most, while also being mindful of the impact on the taxing jurisdictions long term, i.e. Your school districts across Boone County, your fire districts, your library districts, who tend to be larger recipients of that real property tax collection and then distribution back out. It's a complex issue. It really is, and there are no easy answers to this. Administratively, this will be a challenge. We will, if and when it's passed and implement the policy, we'll likely have to hire additional staff here in Boone County government. The way we're doing it right now, likely minimum one person, likely 2 to 3 people will have to be hired to administer this program. We're just not set up to with the systems in place. So there'll be a lot of technical issues that need to be worked through, a lot of administrative issues that we need to work through to figure out how the procedure is going to work. But our intent is to handle it like we would anything else that we are tasked with doing. Well, making sure that it's fair, making sure that we have safeguards in place to protect the system as a whole, make sure that it works for the seniors who need it, and make sure it also works for or doesn't do unnecessary harm or long-term harm to the taxing jurisdictions. Shortly after the legislation was signed into law in mid-July, I sent a letter out to all the taxing jurisdictions across Boone County, asking for their, basically like a fiscal note, similar to what the state would do. I asked them to provide a fiscal analysis on what implementation of Senate Bill 190 would mean for their taxing jurisdiction. Those taxing entities had a very difficult time coming up with numbers. The estimates we got kind of ranged all over the place, but it's also very challenging. As I said, there were several ways in which the legislation was drafted that didn't make it clear. The way the State Tax Commission is currently interpreting the law, it can be retroactive. Now, the General Assembly, that wasn't the intent of the General Assembly. They're trying to get that cleaned up this year. But that was certainly had to be taken into account by some of the taxing jurisdictions. The way the plain reading of the law stands, not the interpretation of plain reading of the law, is that only applies to individuals receiving Social Security. That certainly wasn't the intent of the General Assembly. They're trying to get that cleaned up this year. For the majority, the vast majority of counties have adopted a policy at this point. They've taken an age approach rather than Social Security, because when you're just looking at Social Security, there are a lot of individuals who would be excluded from participation. We've seen a couple of the counties who have implemented, I think 3 counties who have implemented the policy at this point, and the larger counties population-wise have put in a means test to addressing it. And I know that's something that we have publicly discussed, is balancing the needs of the seniors who need it the most, while also being mindful of the impact on taxing jurisdictions. And so what we have said publicly is kind of a starting point for that conversation, that we're exploring a proposed policy that would be adopted, that would apply to homesteads that are with an appraised value of $300,000 or less, as shown by the assessment file. And it's important to note that what is shown by the assessment file, because that is an appraised value that tends to be significantly lower than what people believe their home would be appraised at. So, if you're selling your home or purchasing a home, you have an appraisal, typically from a commercial company that does appraisals. This, as the assessment file, is what is on the assessor's file downstairs, the elected assessor. And just for context, 86% of the homes in Boone County would fall at or below that $300,000 level. And so that's similar to what Jackson County has done. That's similar to what St. Louis County has done. They try to put a very generous means test in that would try to carve out some of those larger homes in a manner that wouldn't try to minimize the longer term impact on those taxing jurisdictions. So we're going to, if and when if Proposition 1 passes, we're going to have that start as a conversation. That's not adopted policy. That's not that does not reflect the stance in which we were taking. That's really a starting point for the conversation. We'll also look at a renewal period. I believe that we would want to look at having an initial end date for the program, so that we could have a very public conversation about what the impact has been, how it's impacted seniors, how it's impacted taxing jurisdictions. Do we need to make any tweaks to it before we renew the program moving forward? There's been some misinformation going around, whether it's purposeful or not. There's been misinformation going around about the vagueness of the ballot language. And there's a person in particular who's saying that we wrote that language to exempt certain taxing jurisdictions from being taxed. That's absolutely not the case. The Proposition 1, as it appears on the ballot, reads as, shall Boone County exempt senior citizens from certain increases in property tax liability due to such senior citizens' primary residence. We added one word to what was allowed under what was in Senate Bill 190, and that word is certain. before increases, so certain increases. That's not to exempt any taxing jurisdiction. We've communicated with every taxing jurisdiction prior to us placing this on the ballot, letting them know that it was coming and that they were going to be impacted by it. We had that conversation, tried to do it in person, especially with all the schools and library districts, the fire districts, to make sure that they understood that they would be impacted. That word certain was important because we know that the General Assembly is working on legislation now that would potentially exempt, that will likely have to exempt the blind pension fund from this because that is a constitutional requirement. We also know that the General Assembly is likely to have cleanup legislation that deals with bond indebtedness. Bonds, taxing jurisdictions go out to bond market after voter approval. Their actuaries base the repayment on those bonds off of set payment schedules. And anything that would harm a taxing jurisdiction's ability to repay their debt would be problematic for all of us. And so we knew that we needed to add that word certain in order to have a watch and see but also have a broader conversation. Does bond indebtedness need to be excluded? Does blind pension fund need to be excluded? Also, there's a conversation happening at the General Assembly right now about new construction. What happens when there's a massive remodel of a property? Is that excluded from any property tax increase? What happens if there is? What happens when a property in unincorporated part of the county gets incorporated into a city limit? Do they have to pay the city taxes, or are they exempt from that? Legislation moving this year is trying to clean that up. And so we want to make sure that we had the flexibility to do so as written in the proposition language. I know what I've been talking about it can be a bit confusing. I apologize. I'm trying to make sure that I can communicate it in an appropriate way. I think at this point, would be happy to answer questions that you have and talk more. Just have a conversation about your thoughts on it, as well as what I can answer for you.
Okay, Dave Brahill has a question.
Yeah, so you're hitting on all the vagaries about the law. As I understand it, some of the legislation that's still being considered would prohibit the county from doing something like putting a means test, or it would prohibit the county from doing something like protecting the fire district or the school district. And the people are going to be voting on April 2nd to give the county authority to do something, but it's still not clear what that is. Am I correct in that assessment?
There certainly is legislation moving that is not across the finish line yet. That does have there is some language in there that could potentially limit our ability to place a means test on it.
Then how do we know what we're voting on April 2nd? Which is why I'm voting no.
The question wouldn't necessarily change. The General Assembly will always have the ability, regardless of whether they do it this year or in subsequent years, to come in and try to rewrite a program. We see it happen. We see preemption language happening quite frequently. What I can tell you is that if and when it's approved on April 2nd, we will begin the public process of drafting the policy and adopting a policy and procedures. That policy will be adopted prior to the procedures being worked out, because there's a lot of implementation side that we have to figure out internally. But the policy could be adopted in a matter of the coming months. And so I expect, it's possible that we, adopt a policy prior to any new law taking effect, or potentially after too.
And this will be done continuously as you're responding to court decisions, because it's all going to wind up in court, right?
It does appear as if there are several potential challenges that could arise, certainly out of the way it's written right now, and whether or not cleanup language is adequately addresses the statute. There could very well be challenges into the future as well.
Thanks.
Yep.
Mari?
I was going to ask a question similar to Dave's about the legislation going through, because in Representative Tyson Smith's newsletter, he said that a bill passed the House overwhelmingly. I think only 2 people voted against it, that has preemptive language in it. But I also have a question about, I feel like people are unaware of what their property tax goes for, or many people. And I'm just wondering whether there will be an effort to educate the public about the fact that this will impact school systems in the county. And the proportion of older people is relatively low in our county compared to some other counties in Missouri. But in some areas of Boone County, like Sturgeon or Harrisburg, for example, I would suspect that a lot of the property owners would be exempt from any increases if this goes through.
Yeah, while it would have the largest real dollar impact to Columbia Public Schools, it would have it just the way that will play out, it will have a larger percentage hit to a Sturgeon, a Harrisburg, Hallsville, Centralia, where the population skews older. It's an older population within the taxing boundaries for the school district. And home values, generally speaking, are comparable across the county, but will be a bit lower there, as well as a higher percentage of people at $300,000 or less, if that is the actual where we means test it, or where that conversation ends up. And you're talking about at least 3 of those school districts are already being at a 4-day school week, already having very difficult time hiring and retaining teachers. And so that's something that will have a larger impact on those smaller districts. Definitely. This has been very tricky for the county commission to deal with. This isn't, as I mentioned, and I'm not complaining. That's not a complaint. I don't want it to come across as woe is me, woe is us. It's a very complicated issue that we weren't asking for the authority to administer. And I reached out to school districts in July. It took many of them quite a few months to get back to me, and quite a few emails asking them to follow up on what the potential impact would be. And all the coverage that I saw on it was often framed as the county commission refusing to implement, and so it's almost as if like county commission was opposed to seniors, or opposed to those seniors who need it. And there hasn't really been a broad enough discussion, in my opinion, on what the overall impact of this would be. We know that placing on the ballot will hopefully spur that conversation along, how taxing jurisdictions are impacted by it, what they're already seeing. I think those school districts I mentioned will have a higher percentage of their revenue potentially lost as a result of it. Are already at 4-day school weeks. And generally speaking too, when we see programs like this, like a senior property tax freeze implemented in other states, I have not seen a state that has not implemented a means test. That's not to say it doesn't exist, but of the 20 plus states, I believe that I've had the chance to review what they've done, all of them have had some way to means test it. And I think that's important. To have the ability to make sure that you could steer a program towards seniors who need it the most, because it's important to note that we're talking about a generation, and that's nothing. This is no criticism. This is just talking facts. We're talking about a generation of people. Who has the largest accumulation of wealth in the history of humankind, and how do we make sure that we can put appropriate safeguards in place to get it to seniors who need it, while also being mindful of the schools. And in states who have implemented a similar program, where their taxing jurisdictions realize lost revenue as a result of it, and it's going to take years. It'll take years to realize the lost revenue, as you know, during periods of reassessment, during periods of tax levy increases. But as they begin, as the program moves forward, maybe a decade or so down the road, and they realize lost revenue, then they're more likely to go back for tax levy increases and spread those, you know, spread that lost revenue out as a tax increase among the other populations that aren't exempted from the program. And, you know, in this case, I think it would, just speaking matter of factly, and I apologize, don't want to come across as anti Proposition 1. I'm not, but that would mean, you know, typically could mean higher, could be higher rent for lower income seniors. It could mean, you know, just higher property real property tax assessments across the remainder of the population that's not excluded. So.
A couple of questions in the chat. You really just answered one, but the other is related to means testing. Why are you choosing home value instead of previous year's adjusted gross income as the means test?
Yeah, because you know, the counties, so the state is in a unique position to administer a circuit breaker tax credit program. And as I've talked with lawmakers, you know, I think it would have been the simplest fix for them, rather than passing Senate Bill 190 in its current form, would have been to expand the circuit breaker program, of which the state has successfully administered for decades now. They have an artificially low threshold income means test on that program. I believe it's still set at 35,000. It's been that way for many, many years now. And so the cleanest way for them to do it would have been to increase. And they have a whole executive branch, a whole executive department, the Department of Revenue, that is solely tasked, not just solely tasked, but primarily tasked with collecting taxes, remitting taxes, and part of that is certainly the income taxes that are paid by individuals. And so they have an incredible database of yearly tax incomes and they have, you know, tens of millions of dollars worth of IT infrastructure dedicated to being able to track that. The county doesn't. The county what is within our power, what is within our means, is looking at assessed value. And so that's how other counties have approached this. That's not to say that that's where we will be. You know, if it, as the conversation moves forward and we begin developing the policy and have public hearings, if that's what people want to see, if we can find out a way to do that. Right now, the internal conversations we have, we just don't have the ability to be able to track revenue in a way that couldn't easily be hidden from us.
Okay, thank you. Question for Herb, from Herb.
Thank you for outlining the issues at hand here. I certainly support your notion that we need to have a needs test in this. Situation for old folks is so vastly improved over what it was in the early 1960s, and not so for at least for most, but not for all.
No.
And compared to other needy groups in society. What can we citizens do in this context? You're speaking hesitantly about a limit on the property taxes at 300,000 assessed. That strikes me as too high, and so forth. What can we do with regard to the law that may come out of the legislature, with regard to other things that may help get rational policy here? I just filed taxes. I didn't pay enough, but then we don't get many services. So I guess that evens out.
But you know, if and when it passes, and we believe that, you know, I mean, I certainly believe it will pass. I believe it will have the votes to get it across the finish line. And I think, you know, just engaging in the policy discussion, the feedback that's going to be important for us to consider on how we draft a policy to get it to the seniors who need it, while also protecting taxing jurisdictions. That's going to be important. We've heard from several people already that the $300,000 is that it's problematic, that there are going to be seniors who are excluded from that who may need it. We've also heard that it could be too high. We've heard from quietly from some taxing jurisdictions that like, whoa, that's very generous, and it is. It's a very delicate balance, and so we're going to proceed in a public conversation. These are all starting points on the conversation on what that policy would look like, and so hopefully we get people engaged in it and have a broader discussion. And at the end of the day, we implement a policy, and along the way, people have been educated, including myself, on ad valorem taxes and how property tax is collected and who it goes to, and how we benefit from it as a society. Then I think that this was a good exercise.
Wynn Coel. Wynn, do you have a question?
You might need to unmute, Lynn.
It's also important for me to say while Wynn's getting ready to answer or ask a question that that this will be an opt-in program as well. We're going to create an application, so it will be an opt-in. Not everyone, you just automatically know as soon as you create an opt-in that there will be less than 100% participation of those eligible seniors or those eligible for the program. So where that ends up, quite a few people who are voting will have the opportunity more or less to vote twice on it, right? Vote yes or no on Proposition 1, and then vote whether or not to individually participate in it. And so, people who don't want to participate don't have to. That's something that we're going to have to do in order to track. We're certainly having conversations about how do we limit potential fraud of a program, because what we've seen in other states is that homes where there's property tax exemptions, you often see more trusts and estates set up as a result, and where it may include property that's not necessarily primary residence. There's no database that tracks primary residence across the state of Missouri. So if you own multiple homes in other counties across the state, could you be claiming properties? Could you be claiming those homes in other counties as well? And so, there's been conversation, can we tie it to voter registration? Can we make sure that we can identify where that individual is registered to vote in the state of Missouri in order to tie that as their primary residence? We would, St. Charles County, who is adopted but not quite implemented yet, they're talking about a yearly application that people would have to submit, and kind of under penalty of perjury to also be able to track
This is
where the
fascinating.
primary residence is.
This is fascinating.
Wynn? Herb, Sue, do you have another question? You're muted.
Okay, if it does pass and we decide we want to pay our taxes, we can go ahead and opt out, and so that we will go ahead and pay our taxes like we think we should.
Yeah, there would be no, you would have to take no action. So
Okay.
in order to qualify and participate in the program, individuals will likely have to submit an application, opt into it, and submit all the necessary paperwork for, just processing it.
Herb
Herb.
has nothing to.
Herb?
Herb, go ahead.
Could you give us some concrete examples of states where you think this is being done well and states where it is not, which are not quite up to the mark? You can skip the latter if you prefer.
I know I've got that somewhere. I apologize if let's see if I have that in some of my notes here on some states that are doing it well. One state in particular, I think that we can take a lesson from on how they administered their program would be the state of Louisiana. I heard directly from a developer here in Columbia who had taken some missionary trips down there post Katrina in order to help clean up. And what they found was in a decent amount of the estates that were created, even after the death of basically the owner of the primary residence had been put into estate. And so a lot of these properties that had been demolished ended up in probate. And it took years to unravel in order for to get that federal financial assistance from FEMA, as well as their state emergency management organization. And so it became very, very messy on how do you untie estates from, and they've been, ultimately been left in the estates because the property taxes had been frozen at that level for many seniors across that impacted area. And so he steered me towards the direction of like, hey, take a look at how this didn't work in Louisiana or how it further complicated cleanup efforts and ultimately cost a lot of families a tremendous amount of time and money from not being able, from unraveling their estates in probate. And so that was a state I think that we can all take a lesson from. I apologize. I know that there are several other states who have done it well. As I mentioned before, I kind of wish we would have seen the General Assembly expand the circuit breaker tax credit. That senior property that credit, the circuit breaker credit, goes to both renters and owners alike.
Win,
So,
do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. My question was about the circuit breaker. If the bill is going through the legislature, I thought, to increase that maximum.
Yeah.
So if that should get through, that would obviate the need for this bill. But we still have to go ahead and all the expense involved and with it carrying out this.
but one could make an argument that if and when, and there is some legislation that's getting some traction, I think certainly part of the conversation on a child care tax credit program. I think it's been wrapped up in that legislation. If that were to pass, if a circuit breaker expansion were to happen, it could alleviate the need for a program at the county by county level. And I think that's another reason why, I think it would be important for us to have a renewal period on this. If there's a program that expands and has the ability for continuous administration at the state level through Department of Revenue, would we need a similar program at the county level? And so I think all counties would probably want to take a look at can they wrap their programs up in the future if the state's taking more of the ownership of the program. I will say too, as we talk about the taxing jurisdictions across Boone County, and I mentioned prior the more rural school districts in the county who would be kind of not disproportionately impacted, but impacted at a greater extent than some other taxing jurisdictions. Those rural counties across the state, they're quietly, but I will say they're pretty nervous about what the implementation will mean. And I think it's only a matter of time. I think it'll be a slow uptick in this program, but I think pressure will build throughout the state to implement this program statewide. I think, we've kind of talked about Missouri Association of Counties. I know there's resistance out there to move it forward, but I suspect that, public pressure will build, and it'll only be a matter of time, whether it be, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years down the road. we will get to the point where, as long as this statute's on the books, there will be, full participation across the state.
Dave Mallory.
Thank you.
Sometimes that space bar works, sometimes it doesn't. Okay, I have two questions. One, I've heard the term circuit breaker several times, and I'm not familiar with that. So could you just brief in layman's terms explain what that is? And the second question is, I want to ask this very tactfully, which legislator submitted the amendment through this chaos thing in the motion the day before the final legislature session ended?
Yep. So the first part, circuit breaker tax credit, has been a program, I think, on the books for at least 20+ years. I'm thinking maybe closer to 30 in the state of Missouri. It has an income threshold of $35,000, and it is a tax credit at the state level where the state will reduce your, in a refundable manner. It's a refundable tax credit on income taxes paid to the state of Missouri for those eligible seniors. And I forget all the criteria. I want to say that the age qualification is 65. It's a $35,000 threshold. And if you meet that, you can apply for it through Department of Revenue. They quickly check that against your submitted taxes at the state level, and then can get that process and reduce your tax burden at the end of the, when you pay your income taxes at the state level. And as I said, that's a refundable tax credit program at the state. If you, I don't know the statute number, but I know that's a Department of Revenue program. The second question, I apologize, David, it already slipped my mind. The senator, thank you, who offered the amendment. So it was Senator Luchtemeyer's underlying bill. Senator Luchtemeier out of the western side of the state offered the amendment. Senator Luchtemeier has also filed the cleanup legislation. He is the sponsor of Senate Bill 756 to clean up some of the issues in the legislation as well.
Thank you. We need to move on and give Linda a chance to talk, but one last question. If you have a quick one, Dave Rachel.
It's about reasons that make this program not necessary. Isn't there also a proposal that would limit assessments to no more than 2% or something like that, except in the case of a construction or new additions? I mean, wouldn't that pretty much level a lot of concerns, and doesn't require the bureaucratic state the Republicans are willing to build to administer a program which is basically designed to divide people in counties?
So I know that there is some legislation that's moving. I think it's moving in the House. I don't know if it's moving in the Senate on that. It's kind of that time of year where we're watching all movements in Jefferson City with a keen eye, because there's a lot of tax policy bills that are moving this year. There's certainly a renewed conversation on eliminating personal property tax. Personal property tax in general is a regressive tax. There's no doubt about that. But it's also a lifeline for the schools, the fire districts. It's a lot of money, and there's no real conversation on how to replace that revenue. There's also, a platform plank that one of the leading Republican gubernatorial candidates has already taken on eliminating the income tax, and so without a replacement, just balancing the loss of $10+ billion a year to the state budget through budget cuts. And so we're certainly, tax policy will certainly continue to be a conversation for many years to come in the state of Missouri, and we'll watch it closely on how it impacts the local taxing jurisdictions and local governments.
Thank you very much, Kip. And I think it's a little bit clearer than it was before for us. And everybody does need to get out and vote on Tuesday. Alice, do you want to introduce our second speaker?
Sure, thank you. And thank you, Kip, for being here today. It was very helpful. So Linda Hayes is a member of our local Boone County Democrats Get Out the Vote Committee. She's been very active on that. She's volunteered with Boone County Dems since 2008. And as she put it, she's a co-conspirator of the development of this new activation project called Rally Blue. Thanks for being with us today, Linda.
Hello, everyone. And I have a few slides to show you here as I explain the program. This Rally Blue program was first introduced at the Chili Supper. So you may have heard a little about it there, or remember some information on the tables. And since that time, we've been busy, kind of finalizing the development and starting to recruit volunteers. We have a nice sized group going. But I'd like to give you more information about it and see if you might be interested, or other people might be a match. So let me try to share the screen here. Getting better at this, I think. Or not. One more try here. Here we go. Well, I'm going to have to go back, I think. One moment. It's not giving me my screen. I had this all loaded up. I had it in Google Drive, so let me go back here. Sorry. Hang on. Well, I'm not sure what's different about this and other times that I've tried to use it. I'm trying to go to Google Drive and it's not giving me access, so. Nor can I see a regular screen. So let me just tell you about it. How about that? Okay, so Rally Blue is kind of an outreach program intended to activate other Democratic and left-leaning voters within Boone County. We are a project that's based in the Get Out the Vote Committee. I am one of the coordinators or co-conspirators, as we actually sort of feel more like. That's kind of the attitude. Monica Lee is the other primary person involved. And then Deb Finley, as you probably know, is the chair of the Get Out the Vote Committee. So she's given us a lot of framework and help with the Vote Builder app and things of that kind. So the goal with Rally Blue is to simply contact other Democratic voters and give them information that will help get them focused and activated toward the 2024 elections. So we developed this kind of in response to the fact that it's 2024 and it's time to get everybody focused and ready to vote, not just in November, but prior to that. We've had a touch of influence on the April 2nd election, but we'll focus more toward August and November. However, we're not going to wait till July. The kind of information that we're sharing is simply kind of a calendar of election dates, when early voting starts, when registration ends. If you know someone who's not registered, give them access to it online or the link in writing. Then we also have some detail about voting early, voting identification, and also provisional ballots, which a lot of people don't know about. If they encounter a problem when they go in to vote that's not easily resolved, then they can ask to vote a provisional blue ballot. And if their signature on the registration matches the signature on the ballot, their vote will count. So just trying to create awareness along lines like that. And then the other handout that we're providing, there are 3 in total, is about key issues and sharing both good news about the Biden-Harris administration, the good work that our Boone County Democrats are doing in the legislature, and also concerning stats like Missouri being, 50th in, 49th in starting teacher pay. In educational funding, 49th in educational funding, 50th in starting teacher pay, which is quite alarming when you actually hear a number assigned to that. Then we're also, so there's a list of about 10 topics there that are kind of shorthanded. And, I know I was astounded when I read some of those, and it kind of prompted me to want to be more engaged. So that's a 2-sided half sheet with some backup material that volunteers will have if there needs to be greater discussion. So essentially, we are just giving out the information. We're finding out we're finding out if everyone in the household is registered to vote, and if not, we'll have mechanisms for that. We're sharing this voting information, sharing the election calendar, and then sharing this issues handout. So there are actually 3 handouts. We're ready to engage on voter registration as needed. And, trying to talk with other Democrats in a way that is relational. The whole concept for this is based on the concept of relational organizing, which means that you are going to be contacting not just anybody, but people who are in your personal universe. So the door knocking can be in your precinct or an adjacent precinct within your ward. And so you are kind of talking to your neighbors and friends. It's not just somebody across town in a neighborhood you're not familiar with. So I find that kind of a reinforcing idea that, we're not only kind of joining our ideas together, but we're also getting to know some of these folks in the precincts and can make, maybe further contact in the future. So you are developing relationships. Then we're also going to ask our contacts to share that information forward with people in their personal universes. So it's a method for spreading influence, kind of creating a ripple effect of information. So if you know a few facts to know and tell, then you can more easily share those with others. You can share with them your attitude of time to get active, and just help to reinforce the whole democratic effort between now and November. So each person will receive the handouts. They'll receive a list of addresses. Each list is 30 households to knock, and we are filtering those households so that they are 75% Democrat, as well as left-leaning independents. So it's a pretty high likelihood that the doors you will knock on will be friendly faces and like minds. And, you start the conversation introducing yourself and then asking them, what their party affiliation is, because there may be Democrats and Republicans in the same household. So if you encounter a Republican, you can ask for the person who is Democratic on the list. You would have that name in the app that we use for knocking, and, try to get to the right person. So there is a chance that you could encounter Republicans or people who are right-leaning independents, but the likelihood is pretty high that you'll reach Democrats instead. So we do use an app on the phone to give you the maps and the list. We can also provide a printed list if need be. So we're doing some training sessions. Our next one is April 14th. And we're looking for people who might be willing to, sign up or knows someone else who they think would be, again, a good match. So that's the long and short of it. I welcome questions since I didn't have my go by with me.
David?
Yes, thank you. I was looking for the raise hand button. It keeps disappearing on me. Just a quick question, Linda. I take it you've already done some of this. What percentage would you say people are actually home or answer the door when you go door knocking?
Well, it really depends on the time of day and who's on your list, you know, so I generally try to go a little more toward evening. Of course, we have daylight savings times now, so that's a better proposition, and the weather's warming up. So going somewhere around dinner time or just after dinner time works pretty well, especially if, you know, there are a lot of working people in that area. But I've also had really good success in some areas in the middle of the afternoon where I'm reaching maybe a more retired set of folks. So it really does vary. And the thing is, we're wanting just to talk to as many Democrats as we can. And so that's why we're asking up front. And you can kind of begin to tell who you're talking to pretty straight up. So. And we're not leaving literature behind for those non-Democrats either. We're just saying, thank you for your time and moving on. We do, though, want to go back to houses that we don't maybe contact the first time. We're going to try to go back and give that a second shot. And if we're ultimately sure that a Democrat lives there, then we might leave some of the election information with them, but that they can pass along. Anything else? Be happy to fill you in. I have some slides
No.
to provide to you too, if you wanted to see it.
I had a quick question, and that was, this is pretty much exclusively doing it by in person, right?
Right, it is a canvassing activity. It's not to say that we couldn't also make some phone calls, for instance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, or, you know, have a small gathering at your house and invite a few people from the precinct that you know or would like to know. You know, create some energy that way. So we really are in that mode of activating people, getting them focused, getting them a little better informed, and asking them to be active. You know, why just watch TV and wring your hands? That's what I say. I feel better when I get out and talk to people. And, you know, who doesn't like to talk to other Democrats, right?
Right.
Dave Taylor asked in the chat, is there a website or email address we can use to learn more about this or download information, or get more information about the effort?
Sure.
Also,
Yeah.
what are the dates of the training sessions?
Yeah, the next one is April 14th, and then we have them scheduled tentatively, just depending on the ebb and flow of how many volunteers we get, but at least once a month we'll be doing this for the next few months.
And where do those happen?
I'm sorry?
Where do those happen?
At the Boone County
Headquarters?
headquarters.
Thanks.
Yes. For the most part, we can do some of them by Zoom, but we ultimately have to connect with you to give you the physical material. So we do some both ways. Yeah. And there's more information on the Democrat website, Boone County Democrats, and scroll down to the happenings and information section. I believe it's in. There's a post about Rally Blue right there. And there is a link there. You have to kind of about 3/4 of the way through. There's a link. So I see I had a QR code for you in the slides, the whole 9 yards. I don't know. Anyway, look for that. And then also we have a Gmail address too, which is rallyblue.gotv@gmail.com. rallyblue.gotv@gmail.com. So we'd love to hear from you. There's an easy online sign up form. The training will be brief. There will be cookies.
Ooh, cookies. Linda,
Come
I
on in,
realize,
butter's fine.
this is it's still just getting started, but how many people do you have signed up already for this,
Yeah,
this effort?
Have probably about 35. Not everyone who has committed has come for training yet. So, you know, we've had multiple contacts. So the more people we can get and the more responsive they are, the more energy we can put forth. So I hope to see some of your names there too on the list.
Well, thank you, Linda. It sounds really good. I think we really have a chance to make an impact in November here.
Yeah, I actually do too. So
Thank
talk it up.
you
Let's
for,
go.
I want to thank, I think doing it door to door that way is a very excellent, but I have trouble on balance now, so it's not
Sure.
so easy for me, but I've done it a lot of times.
Mhm.
And it is good. And I think leaving it to just 30 is much more manageable. That's really smart on your part.
Yeah, the thing is, we're trying to hit all of Columbia.
I know.
We're trying to
Yeah.
create a wave. So if you know anybody in the remote, more remote,
Right.
I'm in 4E. I've got plenty of help here, but
Right.
there are lots of other precincts, or if you don't mind to go outside your own ward or precinct, there's much to be done. We are going to try to hook up too with the NAACP. I talked to Mary Ratliff on Saturday, so they're going to get
Sure.
active as well.
Awful lot of voters who don't live in Columbia in Boone County.
That's so true. Well, and actually we do have a person in Hartsburg who is coming and has a team. And that's the thing too. We're kind of, bring a friend, bring a couple of neighbors to go visit some other neighbors. So it should be, friendly and fun. And we're just sharing and trying to activate people to join what we believe in. So. Okay.
Okay, well, if
All right.
if that's all, and thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you guys.
And as for the rest of the meeting, first of all, I want to remind you that we are in person next week at the Democratic headquarters. And our program is about ballot issues, right?
It's about, excuse me, about initiative petitions that I hope will be on the ballot.
And one